3 weeks ago, I rejoined the board of SCI-Arc after more than a decade's absence. While touring the school, I was amazed at how the place continues to develop. An impressively organized back of the house allows for a highly malleable design environment, essential to this institution, which is commitment to diversity of investigation and experimentation. And of course, this year, the wizards behind the curtain managed to secure the purchase of the property. Eric, you weren't supposed to say this. I'm supposed to compliment you on this, yes? And as Eric said, this is a huge, huge thing. And congratulations go, of course, to the director, Eric Moss, to the board of directors, to the staff, and to the faculty. This is a remarkable achievement. SCI-Arc has flourished for nearly 4 decades. And it has moved 3 times, a very risky involvement for an institution. It now has a permanent home, and the risk is left behind us, and kudos to everybody. Anyway, I was concluding my tour, and I was walking through the Solar Decathlon project. It used to be right over here. It's now, of course, in Washington. And there were these cranes right here where we're standing. And I learned they were going to be the place that we're going to construct this space that is we're occupied today. And I was thinking, how typically SCI-Arc, an institution renowned for its conceptual thinking, but also committed to the engagement of the real. And it is right and fitting that you are here today in this space designed by 2 of the faculty members, Dwayne Euler and his partner Jenny Wu, for this graduation ceremony. And the unusual nature, believe it or not, in architectural institutions that support their own faculty and that are committed to the reality of its ideas, which is this thing we're occupying today. In keeping with SCI-Arc's essential nature, the space is both temporary and contemporary. The temporary implies that is of this time and place in architecture, interpretive and specific to the celebration today. The contemporary implies the space itself will be rethought and redesigned annually to provide an environment that evolves and changes just as the curriculum evolves and changes, that encompasses new technology, new world realities, and the new modes of creative thinking that you were so charged with developing over the course of your education. Today, at this 39th commencement, as you depart, as you emerge, as you begin your next engagement, I'd like to speak about this particular nature of SCI-Arc and the unique experience that you've received here. SCI-Arc is a remarkable place in large part because of its commitment to engagement. Successful engagement with the real requires malleability, resilience, openness, imagination, and tenacity. You have not spent your time here being immersed solely in a conceptual or philosophical. You have not been in the hiatus of an ivory tower. Rather, you've been nurtured to go out and engage with the real world. Engagement is embedded in the ethos of this place. It is a stance required for all of you to make your way through this particular educational experience. It's not easy to graduate in a recessitory, difficult time such as these, but you are lucky to have been here. You have been trained to think, to deal with ideas, and finally to apply those ideas, to bridge possibility and potential with the pragmatics that's embedded in everyday life. You, with your energy, your commitment, your optimism, are precisely what this world needs at this moment. It's apparent to all of us that you're going to enter this world at a particularly unsettling time, both pragmatically in terms of the economic realities and culturally in terms of the existence of some level of confusion over who we are at this time, the nature of our culture, our values. In the late 60s when I graduated, we had a parallel set of issues. Many in our country were operating on very different beliefs and values. That's normal. Yet we had the feeling that our vision was the correct one and would prevail. We were optimistic. We knew that the values of post-World War II era were coming to an end and would not hold up to the demands of more freedom, more openness, more equality. We sensed an explosion of possibilities that were inherent in artistic and creative realms. Dueling cultural narratives were at work then, very similar as they are now. Now, some 40 years later, the pendulum seems to have swung to the opposite direction, to the right. A couple of days ago, I was reading The New Yorker, and I came upon two articles that describe the dueling narratives I'm describing here. I have to say, as an aside, I have a habit of reading lineally, and I'm fascinated in the non sequitur or the apparent unintended connection of articles, and this was very much part of that. The first article, page 54, subject, Michelle Bachmann. A serious contender in the 2012 presidential race. Hers is a compelling American frontier story starting in the 1850s. Her family's immigration from Norway to Minnesota in search of the liberties promised in this country. Her life story was told. Her parents' broken marriage resulting in family poverty. A young woman in search of stability and meaning in her life. Her search led her to adopt the views and values of her mentors and teachers, whose interests were based on fixed historical narratives, in this case, biblical. These values led to a logic that includes the condemnation of the Italian Renaissance, the Enlightenment, Darwin, who's everybody's hit person, secular humanism, postmodernism, etc. A somewhat extreme story, but it's interesting out of that extremity. These are easy rejections because the underlying questions inherent each are incompatible with an absolute, a literal, and a final authority. The attraction to this type of reductionist narrative isn't hard to understand if the reality of relativity is too stressful. There is safety in fixity. Second article, page 64, a very different story. A story of Svante Pabo, who heads the Department of Evolutionary Genetics at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany. His life story, a bit different, the product of two academics. He was the child who was encouraged in his idiosyncratic interests, such as his obsession of old things and his goal to discover mummies like Indiana Jones. No one discouraged him. He grew up moved to study medicine and cellular biology. In the circuitous past, he found himself fascinated with viruses, and in turn, that brought him directly back to his earliest interests. An old bone, 55,000 years old in this case, his childhood mummy, let's say, revealed traces of non-human DNA, which led him to decide to attempt to sequence the entire genome of the Neanderthal. It occurred to him that if this was possible, then a whole new assumption of the way of studying history would open up. His efforts, in fact, evolved to what is known as the leaky replacement hypothesis. Before modern humans replaced Neanderthals, they shared a bed with them. These two stories will relate, as odd as they seem. Liaisons produce offspring who genetically and biologically contributed to the survival of the eventual inhabitants of Asia, Europe, the New World, human beings. It was discovered that human, us, carry between 1% and 4% of Neanderthal DNA. Two very different stories that lead us to radically different assumptions, which I'm going to connect to you. The world in which you will be engaged, the students that we just talked to today, your professional life requires a significant amount of negotiation between these two poles. Each establish an ideological framework which has clearly led to very different notions of who we are and how we should dare imagine our potential as architects and its impact on our world. There are two fundamental approaches of understanding here. The first one champions continuity and the conservation of existing ideas. It looks to a very literal reading of history for its orthodoxy, for definitive answers to all questions. There is no doubt that we share this human trait and that we're sometimes attracted to the easy answer. We're habitual creatures. The problem is that buying this as a worldview keeps us intellectually asleep. This thinking left unchallenged fixes our perception of the world and is essentially a very reflective method of inhibiting creativity. The second one, evident in Pabo's insatiable curiosity, prioritizes openness towards possibilities and insists on assuming that we know very little. It sees the nature of humans as inquisitive and capable of not only solving problems, but of also conceptualizing new sets of problems in an environment both interconnected and complex. Curiosity has a critical role in each of these views. In the first, curiosity is curable condition that can be treated with exposure to the facts. The facts are, of course, in quotes. In the second, curiosity is not a curable condition. It's the driver of all insight, of all ideas. Curiosity simply has to be encouraged and understood as an incurable intellectual catalyst. Your creativity will sustain you in many ways, but largely by its reciprocal potential. It connects us to everything and creates a rich feedback loop that continually feeds new creativity. It is also what creates a plastic force and it drives each individual person to grow out of himself into something new. It's that what got you to SCI-Arc. Your education has prepared you to seek big ideas in a post-big idea world. It has provided the conceptual underpinning that will allow you to discriminate between these two divergent value systems that I have discussed. The notion of this spirit of exploring, this prioritizing of inquisitiveness, has to do with the search of knowledge. It is a type of instruction that's embedded with vitality. This vitality, this intensity, this total immersion, emotional, intellectual, is what defines this institution. It's literally the definition of SCI-Arc. It's a signature. I just witnessed today on the reviews these amazing, amazing projects, which were just humbling, really, in their intensity and in their consistency. I can tell you that I can report to you in my 40 years as an architect that if you can hold on to this vitality, this passion, it will give you immeasurable fulfillment. Nietzsche said it best, quote, "For art or architecture to exist, for any sort of aesthetic activity to exist, a certain psychological precondition is indispensable: intoxication. Intoxication must first heighten the excitability of the entire machine." Isn't that amazing? I could find no quote that's better for SCI-Arc, right? Intoxication must first heighten the excitability of the entire machine. No art is possible before this happens, end quote. Ideas, the project of this intensity, are not meant to stay in the brain or the imagination. Your education maintains this high level of engagement by demanding that you challenge and continually reimagine your own ideas by testing them in the real world situation. Choosing this life of creativity isn't following an easy prescribed path. Ultimately, in discussing engagement, we're looking at the question of how we create meaning in ourselves. Meaning forces the way up like a root growing under the pavement. It breaks the paving stones. Many people would like to see these stones remain in a neat grid, but unfortunately, there is this tree with all of its forces and necessities that you have no option but to follow it. Congratulations, class of 2011, parents, friends, faculty. This is your day. Enjoy the afternoon.